Hello and welcome to the first locally originated production of CAT, Columbia Access Television, coming to you from Studio B on the Stephens College campus in Columbia. Our purpose for the next few minutes is to discuss what CAT is all about and also to talk about Columbia Cable Television and the upcoming renewal of the franchises for the two cable companies that serve this area. We're going to have with us this evening my colleagues turning to Joe Sapp, who is board president of the League of Women Voters. That's the local LWV chapter, and teamed up with volunteers from Columbia Access Television to produce and air taped cablecasts of political candidate debates in the forums back in November for the election. Sue Buskey, who is president of the Buskey Group from Sacramento, California. It's a nationally recognized expert in what we call PEG television, PEG access. That stands for Public Education and Governmental Access. She's also been helping the City of Columbia in its upcoming franchise renewal negotiations with the cable companies. And she will also be consulting with the task force on Columbia Access Television. She will be helping set up the public access television focus workshops that are going to be scheduled within the next few weeks. And we'll be talking about those at greater length in just a moment. Art Gerhart is station manager for JCTV in Jefferson City. That's the public access television there. It's based at Lincoln University, and Art has been with JCTV since its inception. The local access channel celebrated 15 years of community programming this past summer. And rounding out our panel, Beth Federici, board president of Columbia Access Television. Beth has been instrumental in bringing back a public access channel to Columbia after she moved here in 2001 from cities that included Houston, Texas, and Portland, Oregon, communities where there was a great deal of activity in public access and community television channels. Now, we're going to assume that a great many of our viewers probably know relatively little about this subject we're going to be talking about tonight. You've heard about it, perhaps you've tuned to Channel 3, and you've begun to see some of the programming that has now been put on that channel, having to do with public access. We also, of course, have had a government access channel. We've had an educational access channel in Columbia for a good many months, in fact, a good many years. Public access channel is taking it a step farther now, and as we say, it already is up and running, and we anticipate even greater things for it in the coming years as more and more members of the community become familiar with it and also become involved with it. Well, some of the things we're going to be talking about now have to do with what is the value of these facilities to a community. What kind of programs are you likely to see? And how do the community citizens and the organizations of which they are members get involved in public access television? How is it funded? A very important question for all of us. Keep in mind that Columbia once did have access television, public access television, back in the 80s. Most of us probably have forgotten that by now. So the question might be what happened, and I'm going to look at Art Gerhart now, who was in on the ground floor, so to speak, in helping get that started, and perhaps you were around when it suddenly disappeared.
Well, when I came to the access television world, I was a salesman at Group W Cable. I was also previously a volunteer at KOPN, but the local origination department had opened up their facilities for citizens to utilize their gear to produce a few programs there. Public access allows people to access the cable system, and a lot of times that also includes training and equipment. And back in those days, it really took a lot of technical expertise to do a program because you were basically using the same professional gear that the other TV stations were using. And just the technical difficulties of producing a program really washed out a lot of people. It's a lot to absorb, just walking in off the street and having to learn how to use professional equipment. I remember the first time someone put a camcorder in my hands. It was one of the junior high school kids that was doing the music programming. And it was like a completely self-contained recorder camera. I don't know, what is this? But from that day forward, equipment became so easy to use that it was, at that time, it was a very exciting future for Access. But the cable company changed hands, and the emphasis was on more profit, and so they downsized, and they merged the local origination department with the ad sales department and cut their staff. And it pretty much, when the cable operation here in town moved out of the old ice plant, that's when Access Television and local origination really ended.
Of course, we've gone through a number of cable companies since those days. And I think that as time went by, probably a lot of people simply forgot that there is a provision in the cable franchises that says cable companies should provide public access. Let me ask Beth Federici here to talk a little bit, to expand somewhat on the working definition of public access, how it differs from what we are seeing on all the other cable channels, and how what people can expect to see.
Well, public access, at least the way we're interpreting it here in Columbia, is really free access for people to express their views on whatever they wish to express their views on. It supports the First Amendment. It doesn't have an agenda, as long as people are not violating FCC regulations, inciting violence and riots, libeling people. They are free to express their views on a myriad of subjects. The difference between that and, for example, our local government channel here is focused on city government and city government departments. So the programming you see on there has to have a direct link to that. So an average citizen who wants to make a garden show, unless they received funding from the city for their garden project, they couldn't put that garden show on the air. Public access accepts programming of all kinds. As long as you meet our minimal technical requirements and you're a user of Columbia Access Television and you've gone through the orientation and signed the proper paperwork, you can submit your programming and we will air it. You may not get the exact time slot that you've requested. We're going to try to meet those needs, but your show will be aired. We will not be censoring programming. We firmly support the First Amendment and believe that people have the right to communicate to their community. And we hope that different factions of our community who don't regularly see themselves on television will take advantage of this equipment and show different aspects of their community to the rest of the citizenship.
This question of editing, censorship, if you will. Let me ask Sue Buskey, who's seen a great many public access channels around the country, and what's the pattern in terms of program content and the I want to say the ownership, but the urge on part of some citizens groups, perhaps, to challenge what they see and hear on public access television?
Well, I think one of the things you need to think about is there are a lot of different kinds of people, different interests and whatever that live in a community like Columbia, okay? Or live in the community I live in, Sacramento, or in any community. And if an access channel mirrors the diversity of interests and whatever in the community, then it's really kind of reached the pinnacle of what it should be, okay? The way you get there is really to create an environment in which, whether you're a social service agency or the Girl Scouts, youth soccer league, or a neighborhood association, a group of high school kids, to create an environment in which, no matter how you come to it, you have the ability to be able to use it. So the services that are provided by what we now call a community media center, okay, are services that range from very basic training in how to use a camcorder and editing system to, in many cases, very sophisticated. People come in who who have their own equipment, who have a tape already prepared. People come in who have very sophisticated skills. So just as the diversity of interests should be mirrored by the channel, The services, because that's what really a community media center is, it's a service organization. The services provided by that community media center should be addressing the various needs of the various constituencies in the community. And that's really one of the things as Access has matured since its roots back in basically about 1970-71, just as the technology has evolved dramatically. I mean, it's so much easier to do things now than it used to be. Well, how you manage community media centers, the services that are provided, the way you gauge best practices, they've evolved and matured as well. So in reality, although there are points in time that the major media has tried to make, particularly the P part of the PEG, the Public Education Government Access, tried to portray it as a bunch of wackos, okay? In reality, it's usually the League of Women Voters, the Girl Scouts, the Neighborhood Association who wants a stop sign on that corner, etc. And why has that sort of portrayal of it as a radical fringe evolved? Because it's sensational. Okay, and that's what traditionally, unfortunately, right, wrong, or indifferent, commercial media has looked to something that's going to grab the most eyeballs, and that's something that's different, sensational, or whatever. And so they come at it from that perspective. But some people will be totally bored with most of the stuff on public access channels, frankly, because it simply mirrors the people in the community.
Well, there is the risk, is there not, of certain groups, certain special interest groups dominating the programming if they are the only ones submitting program ideas.
Well, and the key is in making sure that you create a situation, and in my mind, if that is happening, it is because the community media center is not recognizing that it needs to be outreaching into the community. The way access centers used to be run is they said, oh, well, we'll just sort of have some equipment in a room, in a closet, and we'll put a sign out, and then people will come down. Well, that's how you get domination by one particular group or the other. This is a service organization. It needs to be doing outreach. If somebody comes in, for instance, with one particular point of view that, common sense, you lived in the community, it's going to be controversial, all right? Then you reach out as a staff person or the people who are volunteering and try to find the other perspective on that issue in the community and invite the people with that perspective to come in and do a program as well. That way, you're constantly doing that mirror thing I talked about, okay? Constantly looking at mirroring. So in reality, a well-run community media center isn't just a place where people who happen to know the equipment's there come and get it. It really it really involves outreach, public relations. You're running a facility that's sort of like, in the best of all worlds, a combination of a library, because you check things in and out, a training environment because people can come there and learn to use media, learn media skills, and kind of has almost a community or neighborhood center environment because, like for instance, very frequently find that there's some people who just like to use equipment, okay? They just like to, and so there are certain people who come there and it is almost a social environment for them. We particularly find that with youth and seniors, frankly. Is if you create a comfortable environment for youth and seniors, number one, they're the greatest volunteers in the world, and number two, they're going to be there to help somebody else out who needs help because they have the time or the interest to be able to do it.
Before we talk at length about the training, let me ask Jo Sapp here, as president of the League of Women Voters for Columbia-Boone County.
Right.
One of the interest groups that is interested in being involved in this, and I know there are going to be many organizations also of interest. But how do you see this serving your group, and how do you see your group serving public access television?
Well, the League is all about educating voters, first of all. But secondly, we have a strong belief that democracy rests on a very well-educated population. And one of the ways we educate people is just to bring the diversity of voices to the table so that you can hear the different points of view and make up your own mind. So from that standpoint, we think it's terrific. We also, though, are very interested in public policy. And we, last week, one of our committees is working on food and nutrition, and they had a program by Melinda Himmelgarn, who's a local dietitian. She has a piece in the newspaper every week. And they loved it so much that they approached Community Access Television and said, this is something that we'd like to see have a broader audience for. And we were able to make that happen. It's going to be airing sometime in the next few weeks.
Let's talk a little bit about the focus groups, the workshops that are coming up in March. These will be meetings at which we are inviting a great many representatives of a great many organizations who might have an interest in developing programming for their groups, that is, by their groups, for the general public. And they're going to be divided by certain categories so that we don't have one mass meeting at which several hundred people show up, but there will be a series of these. And Sue, I know you're putting together the mailing list, so to speak, and organizing the workshops. What do you expect to happen at these?
Well, the kind of taking one little step back for a minute, one of the things under federal law local governments need to be doing is when a cable company wants their contract renewed, and that's really the process we're in. Mediacom and Charter have come to the city and said we want our franchise renewed. So one of the things that federal law says is you need to, number one, find out if the company's actually complied with its current contract, and then find out, do what we call a community needs assessment. The community focus group meetings are one of the what you might call research tools that are going to be used as part of that needs assessment process. Now, what happens at the meetings? Well, first of all, we kind of organize them by constituency. Now, anybody can come to any meeting they want to because they're totally open. But we sort of say, okay, there's arts, culture, and heritage, and that's one meeting, and there's another one that's education, and there's another one that local government, because the nature of people in a community is that there's certain interests, circles that they move in anyway. So let's bring together people who, might know each other. It's more comfortable for them to talk. The focus groups will be structured in a way that the first part of the meeting will be kind of laying out, okay, this is the process the city's in and why it's in. This is what cities can and can't do, because it's very important to allow the public to know, to be informed. Cities do not have unilateral control over everything in these franchises, and it's reasonable to share that with the public. At the same time, there's certain things that can come out of a renewal process as community benefits. And we're going to talk about what some of those things are. And one of the things includes the concept of having channels, public education and government access channels, and equipment and facilities and resources to support the community's use of the channels. So laying the groundwork, pretty much factual stuff. Then we go into a brainstorming environment. And we have 4 or 5 questions that folks will be brainstorming. There'll be 2 of us working. We'll be documenting this on the walls around the room. And then what happens is all of that information from all the focus groups gets pulled, and also folks will get a paper questionnaire at the meeting too. And so it's a chance to, number one, kind of get a better understanding of what can be and what the process is. Number 2, put your 2 cents worth out as far as what would you like to see in 5 years or 2 years or 10 years here as far as Columbia. I mean, maybe you just want better customer service. Well, you can tell us that then, okay? But maybe you're also interested in a community media center. Well, you can tell us that too. So that's what so the meetings are really a combination of sort of giving information and collecting information.
How do you keep that from turning into being a gripe session?
Really, really good question. Because we have the questions that we brainstorm are structured kind of, again, federal law says you have to identify the community cable-related needs and interests, okay? So we started out from a broad base of what are the big issues in the community, okay? Are there communications barriers for people addressing these issues, and if so, what are those communications barriers? Would you like to use the cable system in any way, shape, or form to address the big issue? So it's issue oriented. That's the way we find, now there are meetings. As a facilitator, I have my hands full, okay, and trying to keep them from, because we can have a public hearing in addition to this, and if people have gripes, that can be the gripe session, okay? The focus groups really are structured to produce information that's drawn from what are the needs and interests of this community. So that's kind of how we do it. Sometimes you're more or less successful, but you try.
There's a there's a feeling on the part of a good many people, I suspect, that we don't need public access television. My goodness, we've got two cable channels, two cable companies, I'm sorry, with, 60 or more channels. How much more can a person see? So, all right, Joe, before I finish asking the question, you're ready.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here because, you know, one of the biggest issues we've had over the past couple of years has been media consolidation. So even though we've got lots and lots and lots of channels and lots of things to see, we have an increasingly smaller pool of voices that we're hearing. And I think that one of the greatest things, the greatest potentials for this is to give voice to people who don't have a voice right now. And that's why I'm excited about it.
Beth?
And another issue I think is media literacy. Let's face it, television media, television news is probably the way that the bulk of our community gets its information. But they have no idea how it's made. They don't understand about editing. They don't understand that it's not just about what you see, but what you don't see. For example, in an interview, it's not what you the soundbite you hear, but the soundbite you don't hear. And so by teaching people how to make media, you also teach them how to critically watch it. And they're not as easily duped or convinced by the powers that be, if you will, if they know how the process works. And you'll find that people will watch media more critically when they actually have learned how to create it, especially kids who are so marketed to from the day they are born, from the time they're in the womb they're marketed to. And the sooner we can teach them how it's made, the sooner they're not so easily swayed by all of that. And I think it's a way also to, as Joe said, get the citizenry engaged again in the process. And again, like you said, yeah, there's, as Bruce Springsteen said from my very own hometown, what did he say, 300 channels, nothing to watch? Yeah. There's nothing local to watch. Yeah, there's a lot of channels, but that's not the guy down the street that I know.
Would you say, is it fair then to say that you're not going to see on public access television what you're going to see on all those other channels?
We hope you're going to see something different.
But
And you may see similar things, because as with cable these days, you're seeing more cooking shows and garden shows than you did in the 70s when there were only 3 networks. But you're not going to see Joe Sapp working in the community garden down the street. You're not going to see, your local plants and people talking about, Missouri native plants and how to grow those properly and why they're important to our community. So it's going to come down to a much more local level. And I think in the era of strip malls and convenience stores, we need more local rooted product coming out of our community, and that includes media as well as anything
And probably the productions will not be as glitzy.
They will certainly not be as
I was going
glitzy.
to say something about that. Because in the olden days, and I will say the olden days, the benchmark for local television was local news. And if the production values did not look as good as local news, and I'm talking about back in the 80s, and that was when access was new. But what I've found over the years and also at JCTV is that things that have a little rougher edge to them that actually look like they're home brew actually get more attention. We found that people say that when they're going through the channels, if they see shaky camera or if they see someone that looks like they're local, they'll stop because they want to see what's going on. And there is the kind of a folksy appeal to access that a lot of people don't recognize or understand.
They're more forgiving, perhaps.
Well, of course they are. Especially, we have a production that happened this summer with a group of Girl Scouts, and they prepared a tape for troops in Iraq. And they showcased local talent, and yeah, some of it was a little cheesy here and there, but they put their hearts into it, and it was just obvious. And I know a lot of people they love watching local. And when I did some traveling around here, there's some great stories of local channels. Vandalia, Missouri, which isn't too far from here, had someone's father worked at a little cable operation, and his daughter was on the basketball team, and they wanted to have a local cable operation. And so they cobbled together this monstrosity, which was just a VCR hook screwed onto a cable, and it was as nasty a technical operation as you can imagine. But those people in that town loved that channel, and they would watch anything that was on there. And when it ended and it went psh and went to snow, most people thought that was just funny, and they just grew to appreciate it. JCTV, we created a channel that was it was supposed to serve a bunch of different purposes. One of which was, of course, they have a communications program down there, and their intention was to train the students so they could leave our operation, go to Channel 13 or one of the local stations and get jobs. And so the way that it was approached in Jefferson City might be a little different than other communities. And that's another thing that I found is each community is just a little different. Jefferson City and Columbia, Midwest, they're really two different kinds of cities. I think that, like Sue was saying, my benchmark for Jefferson City access cable television is that if it reflects the community, then we've been successful. And here in Columbia, there's so much energy, and there's so many young people who can be engaged in those technical operations. Because, you know, when you were saying about developing programming, I find there's two kinds of people in this world. There are those who want to be in front of the camera and those who want to be behind the camera. And so, you know, over the years, I found what's really the best success is if you can get in the groups those two people together. So you've got all the technical stuff taken care of, and then you've got, you know, the in front of the camera.
JCTV's been operating, what, 15 years?
We went on the air in June of '89.
Would you say it's been successful?
I would say
Has it had a lot of bumps along the way?
I wouldn't say it's had a lot of bumps. It's had the similar problems of other access channels. We're a PEG access channel. We do all three. And one of the biggest confusions is, you know, they'll tune in and see a city government program, and then they'll see a public access program, then they'll see an educational access program. So people, you know, are not sure maybe at any one time what they're looking at. But I mean, the way I felt about it is if you have a broad spectrum of the community, and you have all economic folks from all strata of society involved, you have a success. And I think that the channel has volunteers from the ages of 7 to 70, and we have all ethnic groups represented, and I just think it's a marvelous thing.
We want to talk about the other main issue on our agenda at this moment, which happens to be the renewing of cable franchises. But we also still have a couple of questions to pursue on the public access issue, but we'll do that after this break.
Columbia Access Television, your community access television station. Channel 3, Columbia, Missouri. Cat 3, your community access television station, Columbia, Missouri.
And we're back with our discussion of public access television, which is now being established in Columbia. I could say it's probably in its infancy at the moment, but it is growing, and we anticipated growing even more, in large part due to, well, perhaps what people are hearing on this program, but also because of some focus group workshops that are going to be conducted during March. And there also was one other ingredient in all of this that I wanted to ask Sue Buskey to talk about before I totally forget it, and that has to do with the, what do I call it, an opinion survey that you're planning to conduct, or a public needs survey. You discuss it.
Well, when we do the needs assessment process, we use a variety of research tools, and the focus groups are one of them. And another one is a telephone survey, okay? And so one of the things, and I think, I haven't talked to our researchers yet, but I think probably my guess is February or March. They'll be out in the field with, there'll be a random statistically valid phone survey. And it'll be an interview, folks will be called, we'll do a random pool of phone numbers, and we have to do roughly about 400 to 420 completed interviews, and that'll give us the proper margin of error and so on and so forth. But it'll be about all aspects. It'll be about customer service. It'll be about by customer service, I mean telephone answering by the cable company, technician, do they come when they're supposed to come? It'll be about the kinds of services they offer. Do they offer cable modem service? Yes or no? Is it something do they have HDTV? Do they have DVRs, et cetera, et cetera? I know that some of those services are offered and some of them aren't. And what would you like to see in the future? Then some of the other questions that we're going to ask is, are you interested in seeing programming about your community and local community groups and organizations and such? And we'll do a whole series of questions in the phone survey about the sort of local programming piece. So the phone survey will cover the gamut of all
Well,
things.
by covering the gamut now, we're talking about not only public access television, but we're also talking now about all the different components of a franchise between a city and a cable company that serves that city and the viewers in it. And there are two cable companies which are serving the Columbia area, and their franchise is up for renewal. I believe the current franchises expire the end of this calendar year. So there has to be a certain legal process that is gone through, and that also is what you are involved with on a consulting basis. And one of the things as you just said, one of the things you're going to try to find out, or some of the information you're going to try to find out from this telephone survey, will be how Columbia viewers are accepting or what they're griping about, I assume. And out of this, hopefully, would come some constructive suggestions that would be worked into a franchise.
Exactly. I mean, when you're doing this sort of research, because we're dealing with something that's technology driven, because we're dealing with something that changes really quite rapidly, you have to use a variety of research tools. So the telephone survey kind of becomes our scientific tool, okay? And the phone and the focus groups are our way of getting to information that you really cannot get at when you're doing a telephone survey. I mean, there's just certain things you can get at when you're doing a telephone survey and certain things you can't. So yeah, you have a balance of that. And then the other thing we're going to be doing is gathering, a lot of groups and organizations and city departments and educational institutions do planning documents, annual plan, a strategic plan, educational technology plan if it's a school. Those documents identify needs that have to be addressed in a community and how those needs will be addressed. What better way of pulling another piece of already prepared information into looking at what are the overall community needs and interests. All of that then sort of translates into, after analysis, into what are the sorts of things that ought to be in a new franchise.
It's kind of, as I said, it's a legal document. And as I've read through different franchises from different communities, I've been amazed at the number of different kinds of components that are in those franchises. I had no idea that there were so many things that had to be agreed to ahead of time. Beth, you've been involved for, well, let's just say for a long time, in negotiations, maybe on an informal basis with the city to try to bring about this public access television. But also, you've been a pretty strong lobbyist in behalf of changing the franchise so that certain things would have to be agreed to. For example, a rate increase, or at least a franchise fee that would go up because the cable companies then are going to be having to pay for a great deal of public access television. Talk about that.
Well, the cable companies pay franchise fees to the city, and those franchise fees, and I want to make this very clear, this is not a tax, and it's often misinterpreted as one. These franchise fees are a cost of doing business. The cable companies have to use the city's rights of ways, they have to use their telephone poles to string up their cable line, and they use a lot of city service. And for that, they pay the city franchise fees. The national average has been at 5% for years. The city of Columbia is still at 3%. And in most communities, some of those franchise fees are dedicated to public access, to pay for equipment and staff and upgrading of equipment. After those initial startup funds, perhaps 20 years ago, were given, the franchise fees helped to keep those cable access centers in operation. So what we would like to see here in Columbia is we would like to see Columbia come up to the national standard, therefore not taking any away of the 3% that's already dedicated to city services. So there shouldn't be anything taken away from already what the city spends those franchise fees on. But the new 2% we would like to see dedicated to public access so that we have a stable and solid future, so that every year we're not having to scramble with fundraising. Not that we won't do our own fundraising as well, but there has to be a consistent way of funding public access, and that is one way to do that. You talked about a rate increase. Well, once again, as I reiterated, it's not a tax. So if there was an increase, the only people that would see that would be actual cable subscribers, because the cable company has the right to pass on their cost of doing business onto their ratepayers. What does our $33 a month pay for? Well, it pays for electricity. It pays for their phone lines. It pays to pay their staff. And so it's just another cost of doing business. However, they itemize it on the bill as a fee or a city franchise fee so that it looks kind of like a tax. And so if ratepayers saw that slight increase in that, they may feel that, we're being taxed for this. But once again, the cable companies can only charge what the market will bear. So if they're already charging at the upper end of that, and they think they're going to lose customers by raising rates, they very well may not. So it's not a done deal. It's not a if A, then B. If we raise the franchise fees, then definitely our rates will go up. That's something that the cable company will have to decide. But from my own informal surveying of all my friends and family that have cable, when I asked them, if your bill went up 25 or 50 cents, but you could have public access, would you drop your cable? They say, of course not. Our rates go up 2 or 3 times a year anyway, and we don't get anything for it. So at least now we will have a wonderful media center for that increase. And so I think, and I've also have spoken to other city managers in my research of all of this. I've spoken to other city managers and asked them, when you rate, back 10 years ago when you raised your franchise fees, was there a big backlash? Did people call your office and did they drop their cable? They said no, most people didn't even notice it. Like, once again, they're so used to seeing their cable bills go up 2 or 3 times a year anyway, at least they felt like they got something for the increase.
In Jefferson City, has it always been 5% or what is it now?
It's 5%, and I was going to say something to what Beth was saying about increasing the 2% here. If there was one thing that I think was not planned for, it's, we're 15 years down the pike, and the big controversy right now is how our capital improvements going to be paid for. And part of the controversy is should there have been funds set aside specifically for those capital improvements. We, or I should say Jefferson City, got a lump sum from the cable operation in 1988, which was in the order of $278,000. We spent $200,000 on equipment. $78,000 was for emergencies. Mm-hmm. But now that we're at the end of the end of those funds, the city is reluctant about dedicating more money that they're used to using for city services to improve the future for JCTV. And right now that there's, I believe, a community group that's going to be put together to try to figure out what to do.
It's sort of important to recognize that, kind of going back to that federal law process and what cities can and can't do, that this issue of essentially the rent that the cable company pays for the use of the public's property comes in a couple of different forms. One of them is that franchise fee, okay? But that's not the only one, okay? Under federal law, if as a result of a needs assessment process, remember that telephone survey, the focus groups we talked about, there is identified a need and interest for a community media center, channels, local government has the right to negotiate for and require a cable company to provide channels and support for the operation of the community media center. Now, there's complexities in that I'm not going to dive into right now, but it's real important to recognize that in some of the more successful places that have community access centers and community media centers, the funding for it comes not only from a portion of the franchise fee, but really the majority of the money comes from the other part of the rent for the use of the right-of-way, which is independent funding under the franchise agreement to the local government or directly to the designated access management organization to fund equipment, facilities, and support. If you go to, you start to look at just any one of it, hundreds of places you're going to find that formula in place. In some places, it's all cable company money. I'll be real honest with you. The city doesn't use any franchise fees toward it. I'm not going to pass judgment on whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent. But that's also a situation you have. The one thing that we have observed over the last roughly 35 years of access operations is that if you don't provide for access funding in the franchise, in addition to the franchise fees, it's very, very difficult to keep it going.
Well, I was going to ask that question. What do you anticipate being the situation? And let me put it this way. I'm Joe Citizen, and I'm saying, gee, I don't mind paying another 2% if it means only maybe 50 cents more a month. But am I going to be adding to that constantly? Am I going to be taxed by the city to help to pay for this?
Well, a couple of things, and I'm going to kind of separate it. Number one, any revenue that goes toward the community media center that comes either directly from the cable operator or from the franchise fees, by law, is not a tax. It has been litigated. Okay, it is a cost of doing business. Think about it this way. If you rent a space in a mall as a retail store owner, you're going to probably pay a flat fee for rent plus some kind of net based on your revenue. It's kind of the same concept. Okay, the flat fee, which is the thing that federal law says franchise fees can't go above 5% of gross revenue. And the city can take that and they can put it in the general fund and they can do whatever they want to with it. Okay. But the in addition to is what I'm talking about, okay? And that in addition to, and let me give you an example of Santa Maria and Lompoc, California. Now, they're a long way away from here, but they're similar in size as far as number of subscribers and stuff. Their renewal process generated about $900,000 initially for equipment and facilities to support the community media center, and then another $355,000 a year with an inflation factor, with a CPIW inflation factor on it. That was totally separate from the 5% franchise fees. So that's an example of an outcome in the last couple years of a renewal process where you had, accommodation. I can give you lots of other examples, but I just want, for purposes of example, kind of lay that one out.
And one thing I would also like to add is that people need to remember that these are very long agreements, and not only that, if you just do quick math and you think, right here in Columbia we have about 40,000 subscribers. If the average subscriber is $50 a month, these contracts are adding up to hundreds of millions of dollars for these cable companies. So the money to support the media center that we're asking for is a drop in the bucket, really. It may sound like a lot of money, but when you actually do the math, it's not a lot of money for what you're going to get back out of it. And we're just saying that, it's not officially a monopoly, but it's very hard for more than one cable company to come into a community. So once they set up their agreement, they essentially really kind of are a monopoly. They have the run of the cable system. And so we just feel like they need to give something back to this community that is supporting them. And I think it's very interesting that since the 3 years that I've been here, I have seen satellite take a lot of business away from cable. And if you'll notice the local ads recently, you're seeing a lot of promotion for those local channels that you don't see on satellite, and how we cover local sporting events and we cover community events. Well, who are they talking about? They're talking about us, because we will be the people that will be covering those local events. We are the channels that they are now using to promote business. But yet they don't want to necessarily support us. So
this would not be on satellite.
no,
on
no,
the dishes.
no. We only run. I don't.
On
They haven't
cable.
figured out how to carry us on satellite.
Actually,
but
one of the things I was going to say is there are people in Jefferson City that subscribe to the wired cable service and also have dishes in their yard. We ask them, well, why do you have both of those? And he says, because their church or they just like tuning into the access channels. They want to see city council meetings. And it's really a marketing tool for the cable operators that just now they're starting to recognize, I think.
Yeah, it's an added value that that seems to me would be a great resource for the cable company as well as the community.
One more comment about the funding, if I may, just for clarification purposes. If the city negotiates a renewal that includes an increase in the franchise fee of 2% or whatever might be the percentage, and if the company or the cable company then decides to pass that on to the viewer, the subscriber, as a rate increase, it would apply only to the cable television part of, say, Mediacom's operation. It does not include their online
Like cable modem service.
cable, for computer, for modem service. It doesn't include that charge.
That's right, because technically under law, that's not a cable service.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's a whole nother
Yeah,
discussion.
I just wanted to make sure that we didn't scare people into thinking that any rate increase would apply to the entire bill they pay every month to the cable company. Let's go back to the focus, or not the focus workshops just yet, but to the orientation and the training sessions that also will be part of this whole arrangement. And I might just say parenthetically that some of the training sessions are underway already, and among our studio audience and also helping to put this show together are a number of people who already have gone through some of that training. You too can be a part of this, so who wants to talk about the training sessions? Beth, is that yours?
I guess I can do that. Yeah, this past Saturday we had our first camera training class. And the training class is, well, let me back up. Kind of the steps you take to get involved with Access is you first come to an orientation, which is free, and is roughly the first Saturday of the month. We'll be having our next one February 5th at 10 a.m. down here at Stevens. And you come and get information and a tour of the studio, and we kind of assess where your level of expertise is. As Sue mentioned, we have a lot of folks in our community, especially through the J School and the Communications Department, that already have access to equipment and have already been trained. If you have that, we will have testing out sessions where you can kind of come and show us that you can check out a camera and not break it, and we will certify you. Then there'll be folks that need total training. The training classes will be $35 for a class, and they're 8-hour classes. And hopefully down here the line we will have some scholarships available for folks that can't afford the $35, or they will do a volunteer exchange. After they take the class, they are asked to do 5 hours of volunteer work, which is working on either a production that we're putting together, like tonight, or down the road they'll be working with other producers that are already producing shows. And then they'll be certified to be able to check out the cameras. The same kind of series will happen for the editing equipment, and soon we'll be having a studio class to use the studio equipment. And then you're good to go.
What's the charge?
The charge for the classes are $35. The charges, what we're calling user fees, to use equipment and put programming on the channel is $35 a year for an adult, $50 for an organization, and $15 for seniors and students.
Unlimited usage?
Unlimited use, it's a first
Like
come.
a rental car, unlimited mileage?
Well, you will be able to check out equipment for a certain amount of time at a given time.
I mean, you could create a program that's going to be on every week
You could create a weekly
for
series.
$35 a year.
Surely, yep.
What a deal.
It's a pretty good deal, you certainly can. Exactly, and this is, to get a nonlinear editing class of the kind that we're going to offer, in the professional world would cost you many hundreds of dollars. So, and that's something that I wanted to talk about. Is one of our goals for this. You've probably heard people talk about the digital divide, and as we go into this digital age, how are the haves and the have-nots going to shake out? And are only the folks with money, and especially as we see, it's costing more and more money just to go to even publicly funded universities. An access center like this will give folks who can't afford to go to the University of Missouri or Columbia College or Stevens College an opportunity to get trained in some of these digital media arts and have a whole new career that they may never have thought that they would be able to have. Hopefully down the road we'll be able to have computer classes and Photoshop and web design and things like that where, once again, folks who maybe would never have had that opportunity will be able to get that kind of training.
You keep referring to down here. We better say we're
Where
down
are we?
here.
Down here, we are located in the Hellas Communications Center here at Stevens College, 1405 East Broadway, in the basement by the radio station. Many folks might know where the Windsor Auditorium is. We're in that same building downstairs. Once again, February 5th, 10 a.m., we're going to have our next orientation. Quickly, www.cat3.tv is our website. And the telephone number, 876-7137.
It could change your life.
And it really could. And if you don't like what's on TV, come down and make your own.
I've had people at JCTV say that access television has changed their life.
Well, I feel that it's changed mine. I work as a professional now. I did not go to broadcast school. I didn't go to journalism school. I learned how to make television at public access. And as you mentioned, it is a community center. My husband was a PhD student. We've moved around a lot. First place I go. This is how I got involved in this. Came to Columbia. Where's public access TV? Well, we don't have it. Well, we're getting it.
Sue, one final question to you, and that has to do with the focus workshop. I don't know that off the top of your head you're going to remember the dates, or certainly not each organization that's going to be invited particularly to that particular workshop. Roughly the dates, if I recall, are what, March?
They're on March 15th and 16th. There's and anybody can come to any one they want to. We just organize them by constituency area to make it easy for people.
And you're sending out some brochures to...
There'll be brochures going out to a mailing list that's been pulled together by the task force, and then also be on the city's website. We understand the school district is going to be putting it out to all their faculty and staff, electronic mail. So. The key here is to probably remember that if you don't see something within the next couple weeks of watching this program, just go to the city website and you're going to be able to get the information on how to register. And we're asking people just to RSVP because that tells us how many handouts to have at the meetings and that kind of stuff.
Even though public access television differs somewhat from regular television, one thing that is very similar is you run out of time after a while. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, this has been the first locally originated program of CAT, Columbia Access Television. Our base of operations again, Studio B of Hellas Communications Center on Broadway at Stevens College. We hope and expect there will be many more programs from this studio in the months and years to come. It depends on you and on your willingness to share your time and your talent and your interests and your opinions. So thank you for watching. And for our panelists, Joe Sapp, Sue Buskey, Art Gerhardt, and Beth Federici, my name is Rod Gillette.